glanced at my notes this morning and I thought, what the heck was I talking about when I wrote a subject of level of authority? And the thing is, it took me a little while to come to exactly what it was that had brought me to this place. And I actually, funnily, in the meantime, I came up with a scenario that I actually explained or gave an example of the sort of thing that I'm talking about. But that's what I'm going to talk about on today's Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Wednesday, the 12th of May of 2021. Thank you for coming here, whether on Rumble, on the YouTube, which I've been saying a lot recently, YouTube, and the podcast. If I happen to have the podcast up, again, by this point, I probably don't. I've been thinking of exactly how I'm going to try to attack that so that I can get a whole bunch of backlog podcasts done. But anyway, thank you for coming along regardless. And again, the subject today is a level of authority. Now, I don't remember looking back which particular thing I saw happen that made this come to my mind. But I had something recently, or there was something that recently occurred that brought it back to me when I started thinking about this again. And it's what's happening to the other officers and the primary officer, Derek Chauvin, in the case that we know is going on, where people are being charged at a federal level as opposed to being charged at a more local level, whether it's a state level or whatever, in terms of the charges that they're facing for what happened to Mr. Floyd, right? I'm going to say this again. I say this pretty much every time I talk about it. One, I don't think probably what happened was reasonable. Two, that is to say, I don't think what Chauvin did, whether or not it was standard policy for officers, was reasonable. I don't think him having his knee on the back or neck or wherever it was of Mr. Floyd is reasonable. Two, I don't think, on the other hand, it is what killed Mr. Floyd. I think he died of an overdose, quite frankly. Now, is that something that probably should have been handled a totally different way than it was? Well, maybe, but they would have to know exactly what was going on in order to do that. Maybe they could have taken a guess, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe other things were involved, and I can't say for sure. Maybe over the course of time doing drugs, his heart had gotten weaker, or maybe he had a weak heart as a natural thing. He had a heart attack, or maybe he died of asphyxiation, or who knows what, that may have been totally unrelated to what was done by Officer Chauvin. But here's the thing that I want to get to today. Oh, and the last thing I want to say, because it's really pretty much the most important. I can't imagine thinking it's a wonderful thing that anybody, even a criminal, even a man who was dealing drugs and passing counterfeit bills, even a guy who was accused of pointing a gun at a pregnant woman's belly, I don't have any desire to see that person hurt, much less killed. And I don't give a rip what color they are. I'm sorry, I just don't care. But the point that I'm making at this point is this, and I'm going to read you my notes because this is what actually I started out saying, and then we're going to come around and actually talk a bit about it. Legislation not having a veto overridden because of the concerns over law enforcement, over enforcement of laws. I don't remember exactly why I said that, but you get, it's kind of an interesting idea, right? That legislation doesn't get its veto overridden because of concerns of enforcement of laws. Well, that's about the only case that I can see where it's reasonable for people to not override a veto if they feel like the law is reasonable. And maybe even in that situation they can. Here's the real question, though. At what level should any law be enforced? And I would argue that, as I put in my notes here, at the lowest possible one is the answer to that question. There are a number of reasons for this. The first being that local authorities should be more in tune with local happenings. Another being that appeals should be able to go further up the chain when things are done in this way. Okay, now here's the thing. There are other things to consider. One of them that is actually very important is this. Federal law enforcement is not supposed to step into issues that don't involve multiple states. They're not supposed to do that. That's not supposed to happen. So when you've got federal law being applied to people, to situations that occurred inside a given regional area, say Philadelphia, say New York City, say San Antonio, Texas, regardless where, okay, the point is the federal government, if it was between San Antonio, Texas and, I don't know, Tempe, Arizona, okay, now you're talking about there being a potential for federal law enforcement to be involved with that situation. But in most situations, federal law enforcement has basically no place in what are essentially local crimes. That's reality. Chauvin should have been charged locally. Any other officers involved that were charged, that it's reasonable for them to be charged, should have been charged locally. And that's really all there is to that. So if they're charging at a federal level, we've got a problem to begin with, because the federal government doesn't have the right to involve itself in something that's not interstate or international. Multiple nations involved. It's not supposed to be involved in that. So when federal law enforcement involves itself in local matters, to me, you're already in the place of problem. And part of the reason is what I said here. Another being that appeals should be able to go further up the chain when things are done this way, when things are charged as locally and prosecuted as locally as possible. Then you can go up to an appellate court that's a, quote, local appellate court, and then you can go to a state appellate court maybe, and then you can go, the point is you can go up the chain, and actually there's more chance for somebody to get a fair hearing as a result of that occurring. Okay, that's why you do that. That's that's one of the reasons that you do that. Another, though, is the constitutional idea that anything not run by the anything that's not specifically mandated by the Constitution for the federal government should be something that's managed or handled either by the states or by the individuals in the states. This is a part of the reason for that. We have a problem right now. We have federal law enforcement taking actions inside a given regional area that is either within a state or is the state itself, and they have no business there. For the argument of things stepping up to a state level and then maybe to a national level, well, that's a different argument. The argument of things that break the U.S. Constitution and therefore are unconstitutional and illegal, well, that's another argument. But the idea of the federal government, of national government, of national law enforcement charging anybody for anything that is not at least interstate, is really questionable in the best of circumstances. Now, I can imagine a situation where local law enforcement asks for the aid of federal law enforcement to try and figure something out. But the point is, when that happens, it shouldn't suddenly be transferred and become suddenly a federal matter and subject to the jurisdiction of federal law enforcement, even if they're called in to help. What should happen is they should help the states, they should pass whatever information and aid they can to the states, and the states should take that information and run with it as however they're able to do that, being able to call federal law enforcement and federal experts and so forth as witnesses in their cases, if that makes sense. Right? None of this is hard to understand to me. None of this is hard to understand. The federal government's, the national law enforcement's job is to deal with interstate or international issues. It is not to deal with local issues. And when that starts to happen at all, you're already in the realm of problematic situations. This is what we need to be looking at, and this is why I wanted to talk today about level of authority. The level of authority on which a given criminal action, or a given civil action for that matter, is handled should be the lowest possible level, and that's something that's literally constitutional in its nature, because the Constitution again says the things that are not specifically enumerated to the federal government as powers should be handled by the states or the people. That's what it says. That's what it says. Okay, I need to go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you understand what I'm saying. I hope this makes sense to you. I hope you start looking at a few of these things in a little bit of a different light as a result. This has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Wednesday, the 12th of May of 2021. That means tomorrow will be Thursday, the 13th of May. You missed it by a day if you're a superstitious individual. It's Thursday the 13th, not Friday the 13th of May of 2021. Thank you for everyone who's been here on Rumble, on the YouTube, on YouTube or on the podcast. Thanks for coming along. Today's subject, as I say, has been level of authority, and tomorrow we're going to talk on the subject of focus. Tomorrow we're going to talk about focus. Hope you're having a good day today. We're moving ever closer to the weekend, it being that hump day, that middle day of the week, as every work week is for a lot of people. Hope that things are going well for you, and I hope that I will see you again on tomorrow's Daily Summation. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Wednesday, May 12th of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S. .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.